Well, okay, welcome back. And here's the good news for the day. Up on your screen, that is a site just created by Blake, and it's his I think site's the right word for it, but it's twilightofpainting.com, and that's where you're going to go find the book in PDF form. Okay, so some of you I really let down over time not getting this done sooner. I apologize for that. The rewards of reading it are going to be good. You're going to like it very much. I don't know if anybody is any more clear thinking. As much as I may say things, even in this video, about the areas in which I disagree with Gammell, they're on minor points. And when it comes to his ability to think and to think, um, well, to have the data at his command to think productively. It's really something special, and he does it all the time. Now, there's another thing that I was just sent, which is a manuscript. I think one of you guys sent it to me as well. A manuscript of Gammell speaking, and and Blake also. I think he'll probably put it up on this site, but he's also got it uh, in transcript form, in both PDF and whatever you all the plain text sort of forms. So you can now listen and read that, which is not the Twilight of Painting. That's just Gammell being interviewed. All right, and I don't know the soul who is interviewing him. So now, having said that, I just want to thank our faithful four, at least this week, faithful four, and I mean that. I don't always say that right, but Adam C, Stephen J, Benjamin C, and David D, all with your recurring donations. That is really appreciated. Again, don't ever think I don't love it. Love what you're doing for us and for the communication of the ideas. And I really, as I said, I really hope they're helpful, and that these guys then are reasons why they're happening. They're factors in making it happen. That those donations are really nice, really helpful to my staff. Well, what do we call you, Mr. Producer? All right. So look where we are. We're 355 videos or some such thing. Amazing stuff, huh? So I'm going to talk about a couple things. This is from Ilya, and he's communicated with me a fair amount, and I enjoy communicating back. I was interested in that my computer wants to correct some of your spelling, Ilya. It looks like some of your spelling is either British or Canadian. So wherever you're coming from, or wherever you got your English from. Uh, anyway, so Ilya is saying in his first one, I'm going to talk mostly about the second one, but it seems to me that the Renaissance masters were in the habit of drawing the longest line, just as you often suggest when I look at many of their chalk drawings. Michelangelo and his influences and contemporaries also worked from ovoids in the round, and I'm going to show you pictures of a certain kind of that. Almost working from the inside out. That's a question mark. Um, and I'll show you what I think of that idea. Um, there are times when everybody does a little bit of that, if you mean the same thing as I mean, but I don't think anybody ever through history has, that I've been able to clean, to bring to mind at any rate, and that's with me bringing it to mind, not going and digging, who actually work in this way of doing an eye and a nose and then another eye and all, and building a face out from that. I don't think that's very much of a routine. I think most people are more outside in. But so, and I'm not going to say much more about that. So, are there any useful comparisons or contrasts between this type of drawing of the masters, both from life and imaginative? Imaginative. By the way, that word imaginary, both life and from life and imaginary, um, from life, imaginative and imaginary are interesting words, but it's not imaginary drawing in any case. It's imaginative. But that separates it from not being real. It means based on the imagination rather than being imaginary. Uh, and the Boston School visual order are worth elucidating. So I don't know, not necessarily a whole lot. A couple things where I've already talked about this. Um, I might be misattributing the following remark to be from Michelangelo. I wish to be free of the tyranny of the contour. I can't remember who said that. I've heard that before too. I don't honestly know who that was. I can't think that it was Michelangelo based on other things we see about him. But what we really want to talk about today, why don't I do this before I do that? Why don't I just jump down to these first sets of pictures? Let's talk about this one first. You referred to Michelangelo, but this is the only thing I could find that sort of resembles ovoid thinking, and I've run into this since way back. And it looks like frequently when Raphael in this picture is trying to come up with a composition, a pose, he does little ovals to make legs and arms and that sort of thing, and he builds out of little ovals. And there are other ones that are even more obvious, but you can see him doing it. You can see those little lines going round and round. But also, this, like Michelangelo, appears to be being done possibly, or I'd even say probably, a little bit from life. That I can't say for sure, though, because so much of it is obviously resorting to anatomy. So if they drew a sort of an approximate shape and then drew anatomy into it, which is, you get the sense what Michelangelo is doing, so they're making up figures, as I've shown you in some of my stuff in the past. If you're making up figures, that might be a thing you fall back into. And one of the points you notice is that there's doubt about certain shading and that sort of thing when you're working this way. A point that Gammell makes actually in one of his references, maybe a Rubens essay. And by the way, I am trying to get as many of those essays that Gammell has put out also on the Twilight of Painting site. So as from time to time, go by there and have a look at it and see what we've got for you. But I mean to make that all available. We used to get those essays. They were, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 or 5 pages long, double spaced. And he would bring them to us from time to time to read. At one point, I handed one back to him corrected. And he was delighted. I mean, laughing about it. He said, "Well, that's not exactly what I gave it to you for." But it was just funny. I mean, there are some funny things, a misspelling or a space between in the middle of a word or something. You never know what a 26-year-old might do in that. But in the meantime, he really was it was just part of the education. He was trying to educate us. So those will be available. But in one case, he's talking about Rubens and whether Rubens is working from a model. And then he points out on the figure that Rubens has drawn, the articulation of the shadow line and how that could only have been seen that way from nature. The peculiarities of a certain light direction and that sort of thing, the vagueness of it is one of those signs that you can say he didn't do it from life. It's too vague in that way. And this drawing here has that feeling of not having any precise shadow notations, maybe a little bit up in this arm here. So however he's working, it's still, though, the point is he's working from the contours, isn't he? Example being this sort of thing here. And of course, if Ang is doing anything, he's becoming the student of Raphael. But you can see here, this is Raphael, the influence, if you want to put it that way. Was it Raphael that said the drawing of Michelangelo and the color of Titian? I'm thinking it might have been him. In any case, these are some of my very favorite drawings, possibly of all time, but also simply of Michelangelo's. This one is a delightful example of projecting form. I think I showed you one last week, projecting form rather off the page, creating a relief out of it. You're talking about a sculptor here. And you can see that he's trying to sculpt it. He's trying to give it a three-dimensional quality, even when he's not really using light and shade. He's still got that going on, and that's by the production of individual forms. So, but again, this might have been borrowed from the river god. It's not really enough like it to be in precise ways. Where is that from? I almost could remember. That sculpture from the sculpture that goes back before the Romans, I believe. But you can see that he's got this handle. I mean, when Da Vinci referred to this as a bag of walnuts. By the way, I know I'm just speaking randomly. I'm not getting to your question yet. What he referred to this as a bag of walnuts is, you could argue that it was because he actually was making little round things that had the third dimension. It could theoretically have been, in a sense, a compliment. Obviously, he doesn't turn the kid into a bag of walnuts quite, a little bit bigger objects than that. But in all cases here, you can see that he's working from outlines, from contours of the object, right? And whether he's working inside out, it doesn't appear to be at any point working from the inside out. It appears to be drawing a line. But you can decide that for yourself. In these parts that are less articulated, he seems to be trying to get the shape of the abstraction of the hand that make up the hand. Is he doing that by having an arm come up and then adding fingers to it? But he still seems to be doing it on points, on the extended, yeah. But does he use a hand? I mean, that could easily be his own hand in theory. You could see yourself holding something in your hand and getting that quality, that look. But is there anything more beautiful in the history of painting than his his ability to, and his suavity at producing a sense of form? By the way, another reason I would say that this is probably, or certainly it's made up out of his head, and that is the deformity of the rear here in relation to the shoulders and torso. It doesn't make any kind of sense. It looks like the hip's in the wrong place. It should have been further over to the left. It's very reminiscent of Raphael's odalisque, the grand odalisque, as they call it. Now let's go to your primary question, Ilya. Could you perhaps go into detail on the role of contour in drawing? Can it be rid of? That's going back to the Michelangelo, the ostensible quote from Michelangelo. Can it be rid of? What's the right balance to be struck between sculptural mass drawing and an Ang-like focus on line? And I assume you mean outline. What order should they be approached with? And whenever you all ask me questions like that, I really defer to somebody else. I can only say, I can tell you what I have found to work in my way of working. And what I'm going to talk about today has to do with both my way, or my thinking about drawing, as well as the use of line and mass, and how I do it, which you can also find, by the way, in the video with this guy in it. And I don't honestly know where to. You asked me whether you'd already dealt with some of this stuff. We have, and there are other things on contour and other discussions of drawing right through the entire list. If you all haven't figured out how to do that yet, just type in Paul Ingebretson talks about painting and then the word list, and you'll get all 300 some videos listed. I think they happen in reverse order. So you should be able to see all the ones except the beginning ones where I didn't put titles on them. You should be able to see all the demos and all those other things. It should be quite clear. But look for this guy on the one where I'm talking about my approach, how I use mass or line and mass, the way I do it. It's a little muggy in here today. I think I'm going to roll up my sleeve. We have a rainy day in New Hampshire, a little bit on the warm side, which is really welcome, by the way, for all of you who are northern New Englanders. In the wintertime, I feel almost like I'm going to, it's just, will it ever end, And so some of you might be in northern Russia or something like that, or Finland or something. I think it's worse there, but if so, if you have my pains, I appreciate it, that being worse. I did hear about 60 degrees below in Siberia last winter. Okay, so can it be rid of? Can we get rid of the contour lines? Big question. Can we get rid of the contour? I'll try to make sure I focus on that bit. But you'll have to sort of sort, as you probably almost always do, have to sort through a bit, through my answers through my discussion to find your answers. Okay, and so what order should they be approached with, the mass and the drawing? Now, Michelangelo's already given you one. He's obviously doing outlines, and then approaching the values as the manipulation of as it were, shadow to produce the feeling of form. And so it isn't a light and shade proposition, and that can change things, and we'll see how that works. So I should skip that section. I've taken that out. What order should they be approached with, like how the parts of the visual order show up in the pictures, the paintings or drawings? So I'll try to show how the parts of the visual order show up in the paintings and drawings if I can. But it's only going to be happening if they're drawing from life. Do you follow that? So Yeah. And so that I'm going to do, for doing that, I'll just point you again at the Boston School Starts, Drawing Starts, or what drawings in general. There's two or three or four that I can use to help clarify what we're focusing on during the practice and also help establish a good thinking process. Or maybe it's already been covered and I forgot. Yeah. No, actually, I keep saying this that I don't have any problem with addressing it again, even if I believe it, even if I'm going to wind up essentially saying it again. You almost never say it the same way. Context delivers a sort of a unique look, a review that's not quite on the same lines. And so you might find if you keep listening for the summary idea, sometimes coming at it from a different angle might give it to you better. All right, so let's see if we can be rid of the contour, whether and how to get the right balance between mass and line, and if there's an order in particular to do it. Well, I do. Obviously, I do visual order stuff. So if you're talking like these guys, Michelangelo, they don't seem to be drawing in particular in the visual order. But on the other hand, there are passages where the lines are darker and the silhouettes are darker, and there are passages where they're lighter. I don't know if that has something to do with anything except the lack of time put in. My guess is it doesn't. I don't think they're drawing at all in visual order. I think I think he's just making up the figure out of his head and he's putting it on the page. And, it's coincidence that this is light and that's dark. On the other hand, there may be some sort of a model sitting in the room, a cast or something like that, where he could see and be using it for reference. Even like this cast here, where he could be using it for references to give himself an idea, if he puts it against, for example, a middle tone background, whether the silhouette on this side is the more contrasty or this one. And it really does pay. That would be the nearest thing to visual order. Then you'd say he's actually using that. As I say, it pays to have a reference like that. Because you get more variety and more entertainment out of your drawing. But I don't think that's true because this is all real dark up here. He's not treated, this is like being treated like a light area, but this isn't, and it surely would be the same lightness. On the other hand, this one also is being treated as light area, and yet again, it doesn't look like he's studying a shadow line at all. And he's had Da Vinci for reference, presumably, shadow lines and all those sorts of things. He doesn't seem to have a heavy inclination to study up shadow lines in the same way as Leonardo did. But that's off point again. So Raphael, so as I said, these things appear to be just simply outline drawings out of his head. Maybe and when you go to a classroom, you can draw without the shadows around it, especially with you just using point, and you need to get through efficiently. If you're trying to use a model and you don't have a lot of dollars to spend, don't fill in the background. Don't spend a lot of time doing that. Just draw outlines. Just draw lines. And then model, and it's going to be just as useful. You're going to have to sort the rest of it out later, and it can be done if you give yourself enough information. And these guys do seem to be trying to put in enough information for it to be useful in a painting. They're trying to put that effort in here where it can be less costly, if you want to put it that way, in a certain way. And so naturally out of that, these guys who I thought were this Bouguereau and Leighton, I thought were sort of the ultimate development of that kind of drawing. I think differently about what's happening in that world right now than I did, but this does look like it's strictly from life, and it looks to be. He had a model posing there, hanging there, whatever, probably literally holding onto a wall or some such thing, or holding onto a bar, and he was drawing it. Really, what a model! If you can get a model who'll do that. But this is true in ways that the other guys, Michelangelo and Raphael, aren't. And most of his work does look like it's being a Bouguereau again. Most of it does look like he's working from actual models. Now, obviously, you can't do that with a centaur when he does that one wonderful one at the Gardner Museum. So don't assume it's all happening. On the other hand, many people will set up models, even use sculpture, as I've done, as the model for the figure, for part of the figure. You've probably seen me show that one with the shepherdess in the foreground. The background figure was a lyre playing Greek statue, a small one, probably a reproduction, obviously. So, and then this is Leighton, and what you're seeing here is the what you call the Neo-Greek, the making of Greek stories, the Greek myths, and using Phidias or some other Greek sculptor as their model of what the ideal man woman would be, and and he does that sort of repeatedly. He seems to be saturated with the Greek form, shall we say. And so his drawings also are in this class of what we call idealizing. It just means making them match an ideal. In the case of Bouguer, I think the ideal's in his head. The women, the young girls, for example, their faces all look the same to me. They're not doing anything. He's not doing anything to make them really look like they're not impressionist renderings of two different girls. So there's a certain idealization that's going on in these renderings of those women. But anyway, this is the example of outline as it's being done from life and then noodled up. And I could say, let's see, there's got to be a place. Yeah. Well, the legs probably are your best place down here in the cast shadows. These are things, the specificity, the fact they're so specific means that probably were done from life. But yeah, he's doing this from a mostly front view, so it is more like an ang, where you're talking about virtually all that he did was almost straight up front view. And of course, when you're setting up a model, and you can set up the model background to be as white as the paper, and you're going to get this beautiful outline all around it. And I suggest that anybody who wants to draw lines like this, do that. Make your life so much simpler. It's not in the same class as when you get over to Sargent, who is trained as a bit of a tonalist and is working the masses quicker and stronger. So, and here's Degas, also obviously from outlines and from models. So in both cases, from models and from outlines. So, yeah. Am I forgetting anything? So contours, let's talk about contours. So all the thing, when I say outline, I mean outline of objects. But eventually what happens is we start talking about contours, meaning the outline, shall we say, of a dark unit. So you just see the line around here. This begins to be something more in keeping with the idea of the shape of a dark and the shape of a light. Now, I'm inclined to think of that as a contour, but we tend to call it something more like a pattern. So this would be the pattern of the darks, that shape being made by the darks, whatever these dark things are up to, and the shape being made by the lights. And because our orientation is around mass, that's where we put our time in, rather than putting lots and lots of time into drawing an object, parts of which are just disappearing, and so on. Again, remember that these figures are being used for painting from. And there are reasons to go ahead and draw all the information. You might need it. This Sargent is presumably a portrait straight up and done, right? So it's full values. It's if it were painted. There's that conversation back in the day when people were looking at charcoal drawing, realizing, and they'd been using red chalk and things like that, but they realized with charcoal drawing, you could actually mass a person in fairly fast and get most of the effect of what painting could do. And some of them, therefore, repudiated it expressly, for what it's worth. The guy I always think of when it comes to mass, though, is Manet. I have a copy of his book, The Raven. It's the Edgar Allan Poe story that he illustrated. And but you can see this feels like it's made. That this head over here, this whole figure feels like it's made with blob masses, which you can argue is that thing, right? And by the way, this is a Zorn, and this you can see the blobs of masses. He's just taken a very stumpy little thing and chunked on the shadow shapes. So that is what I call, as in a sense, sort of pure mass drawing. But there's some degree to which it's going to be line and mass, and line into mass, and that sort of thing. This one by Manet also, if you look at that one, I'll stick my head in it for a second, but you can see that the evidence all through that thing of a blob, of the blob of darks dominating it, but not being outline based. But does the contour disappear when that happens? Or to what degree do we have contour? Well, you can plainly see this is still contour, right? Now, Degas said it's all silhouette, and I prefer the word silhouette to contour. When you're talking dark on light, silhouette's a better word because it doesn't necessarily mean it's around, it's the unit of the object that we're making a shape around. On the other hand, in some places a cast shadow will produce it, but you can see, and primarily you're dealing with the silhouette of dark against a light making a silhouette. And you can do that with a big fat brush. You don't have to have a point, and you don't have to draw on a preliminary with a point. I'll share with you something that I found Gammell saying recently, part of his disparagement of Hawthorne, with whom he worked for 2 years, actually, and with whom Brackman worked, covers some of this conversation. But the Zorn thing, it's very evident that he's a mass draftsman, and this is, presumably that's an etching or a pen drawing. I don't honestly know which. I'm not that guy. I don't know that world, but you can see what he's doing is he's painting just effects, value units, and it's not primarily concerning itself with outlines of objects. It's primarily concerning itself with value blobs and learning to locate value blobs. It's a similar way to this, just a little bit, different form. This does appear to be ink, this top one, or these days you might use a felt pen to get that kind of a look. Some of them have very nice square touch. I've had people do that in the past to understand spotting, just use felt tip pens in a composition class for certain of these things. Okay, but everywhere you go, there is a thing called contour that is, say, the edge of an object. Perhaps it would be up this guy's nose over through here and back down the back side, or it'd be part of his shoulder over here. That's all contour. But what we also have is just silhouette. And so it's a hard thing to want to use the word contour if you think that means from the position you're sitting in, the outline of me, or whatever you're using it for. I should have dragged an ang in here. I didn't mean to do that. Where you can see him drawing the outline of hair that's where it doesn't even differentiate itself from the other value next to it, but it's carefully outlined. The contours of the hair are totally nailed, even though you can't find them hardly. They're carefully cut out, even though they're not distinguished. Now, in the Boston School, we have an orientation, the two different orientations, and what I'm calling the Boston School is only because it's Gammell's term. And he includes Paxton in the Boston School. Now, Paxton's methods aren't precisely those of, and frequently aren't probably at all those of the other guys. So he's done a drawing for this figure, Paxton has, and it's all outlined just like this one. And he probably traced it, he might very well trace it on. He didn't have to, but it's entirely plausible that he did. But these are pencil drawings, maybe 8-12 inches high, not usually much more than that. And they're outline-based, entirely outline-based, and then he models them. So this, in one sense, except that he's using light as his model, as his modeling device, and just doing the form where the shadow line does formy things. It's a little different from the Michelangelo model, where he's modeling up the bumps for their own sake, without a strong commitment to the line of shadow and the shadow mass. It seems to be much more of a diagrammatic exercise in the case of Michelangelo, albeit full of form. But this is more that model where you're doing outlines, and this would be Degas as well, and even Ang. I'm tempted to say to a lesser degree, but this is a contour. This is contour drawing. This one over here, this Tarbell, is a lot closer to what we could think of as mass drawing. In other words, he's done, relatively speaking, relatively preliminary outlines. He's done outlines, but then he's immediately resorted, just like the sergeant of a second ago, he's immediately resorted to the massing and letting the mass be as much a leader as the and the light effects and all that sort of stuff be as much a leader as the outline of the object. And so it begins to be an exercise of visual impression. Dark and light itself, the shadows made, and all those sorts of things are the content, and especially in a side view like this, are the content of the visual impression. It's the things that you're beginning to learn to draw. So the object you're now drawing begins to be the shape of this shadow, for example, or the shape of whatever makes a shadow unit, makes a dark unit, this shape here, maybe even going into this. So if you can see what I'm talking about, this is definitely a different model from that of drawing outlines and sort of giving a nod to where the form is, and then later on figuring out where the light's going to come from. And that's presuming that's what they might be doing. So, and again, we're now talking about Tarbell, but in a painting model, you can see how we're talking contour here. And where do we use the contour? Well, where it reads the most is where you're going to use the contour. And there'll be all sorts of places that are going to be actually lost. There are places that read with a silhouette, but it's not done from contour drawing, even though they're contours. It's done from leading effects. So it's a contour, but it's actually the leading silhouette. Okay. Now the leading effect doesn't have to be a sharp edge silhouette. It could be something like a brilliant spot like this. It could be the thing that's most projective to your eye when you look at it from across the room. It could very well be, or some passage like this. But when you're talking about the shape-making world, we're talking about shapes that are sometimes contours, but they're partial contours. So they're just portions of the figure that's silhouette in the lost and found mode. And what we've found is that we pursue the painting, that is, the drawing within the painting, from those points. Having said that, I do want to just share with you something that somebody just gave me. I'm going to do it right now and come back to these drawings. As you bear in mind, this is Gammell talking about Hawthorne, and you'll see it in this video, these tapes, if you can get a hold of them. It's not video, it's audio. And also bear in mind that drawing, as you see it in nature, form, as you see it in nature, is made up of patches of color. Now, he's talking here from Hawthorne's mouth. So Hawthorne would have said this. Is made up of patches of color, not surrounded by lines. If you get the patch of the right shape and the right color, you will achieve a fine drawing. So forget your charcoal and aim for doing just that, getting the patch of color, the right shape, and the right brilliancy. And now this is the part where you really have to hear Gammell well. Well, that was perfectly logical and perfectly sound. The trouble is it doesn't work that way. And this is Gammell, who had been with him for 2 years, and many other people even longer, and finding that they weren't getting the results they were hoping for. That is to say, the results that they had projected looking at great paintings, say Vermeer or something else. They weren't able to do that, operating strictly this way. And Gammell says, the trouble is it doesn't work unless you're a very accomplished draftsman. You can't get the patch of the right shape in the right place and with the right edges. Now take that seriously. This is the place at which everything rather meets, okay? So contour drawing, outline drawing, if you set it up, and that's the way I justify it with students. We set up casts so that there's a silhouette all the way around. In other words, there's a contour, and you can draw from the contour, and you can learn to flatten the shadows or mask the various values and articulate with cleanness, with clarity, the contours and turn the form, model the insides, as what Degas would have called drawing, is what happens between the contours. Okay? So I don't ever run away from combining both of these things. I want my students to do a good cast drawing, but I set it up so it's an honest cast drawing. It's not a lost and found image. And I take that away from them. I want them to set up a thing where the outline is also the contour. The reading lines, the strongest lines, are also the contour as much as possible. So that you don't have to do it this other way by effect only. Until you get mastery of drawing, that's Gammell's very point on this, though. Until you get some mastery of just all the content of an object, how light moves on an object, the idea of sfumato, the idea of the line of shadow itself, the idea of flatness of shadow, form in the lights, atmosphere in the shadows, all these things, this knowledge that isn't problematical. It underlies the whole visual world. Naming these kinds of things do underline what we do. Even anatomy does. but we still don't work from anatomy, and you're not going to be working when you're working with me. You just work from shape. You don't work from knowledge of what noses do. Do you follow me? Or what, well, let's leave it at that. So let's get back to these other drawings that you're going to have fun with. So here's Benson again. His approach now, literally, is there's obviously a line involved in this thing here, but he probably has barely anything that reads back here. And in fact, that Paxton we just looked at, I've picked on this more than once because he's left like a pencil line here. He's unwilling to lose that line, that outline there, and I'm wondering if he forced it because it's got to be so weak. But if you're line oriented and everything in here that matters is line, like you will find the line around every single thing that is an object, every finger, for example. This is not a lost and found exercise. When you get down to the Impressionist model, though, it does, and this is the really significant difference between Ang/Paxton and Bouguereau and Boston School figure drawing or portrait drawing. It's organized more like this. Now, this isn't a blunt instrument thing the way Sargent's comes across as. He's not just chunking on some big charcoals. He's using a fairly refined point. And then he's modeling in a fairly refined kind of a way, whatever he's got, to the extent that this is a finished drawing, which it doesn't appear to be fully. And I don't know what he was doing with this, whether this is a study for something or what he was doing. But these other ones are more obvious, I think, what we mean by values drawing or mass drawing. And so it's significant that you're thinking mass. Mass drawing is when you have a whole bunch of spots out doing cool things. Why would you waste time drawing lines around objects that aren't part of the game? So this is about a directness. It's about getting right to the point. And so if you blur your eyes at this thing, or if you're looking at your small phone, you can see that this is a series of major masses, blobbity, blobbity, blob, and spot, and spot, and spot, and all these spots that sets up the composition. And Benson does this on a routine basis, including this one where he's doing it a la Manet. It just looks like Manet, doesn't it? And this one, even on the left here, looks like Manet in the thing we just showed you. Now, if you look at the middle one, Betty Camp, which we looked at way too many times probably, you can see that he's doing something very specific. He's drawing with line, and then he's creating a mass, and he's doing it pretty quick. He wants to get to the mass. He doesn't want to sit there on line. Now, when you're working on light paper, you shouldn't have any, and by the way, this grid on here is done afterwards, not done before. Nobody of our guys are using grids to draw from. What you're seeing in here is anytime we, at Boston School thinking people, are working on paper, there's a certain thoughtfulness that goes in. You can throw some lines around. They'll be articulate, they'll be real shapy lines, but you can search out your placements and your great proportions and gesture and stuff in a very preliminary way with a few lines. And if you're inclined to, and then it becomes a quick move into the mass, and so it then becomes a mass drawing fairly quickly. And that is closer to what I'm trying to talk about and suggest that we are wanting to do. So you can see the orientation around this is to get good spot blobs here as much as anything else, is distribute these in a pleasing way. But this would be more if you read the book, Hale's book on Vermeer, when he said they looked at a particular Vermeer and they saw that the eyes weren't drawn like Leonardo, they weren't outline drawn, they were blob drawn. That's more in the direction of how you're thinking when you're thinking mass. You're thinking, what is essential? And that's where blurring your eyes really helps. So you put a bit of a blob here to get started, and then your drawing becomes the first thing that reads like that, right there. Do you see that? Or this whole thing might be a blob, but you'll find there's some need to characterize this as being the most dramatic deviation from the general unity. And those kinds of areas are going to be the place where you put your working time in, rather than drawing anything about the nose or this sort many parts of the eye, or et cetera, et cetera. I hope this is coming across a little bit. In this case here, it's very evident that he's really bringing with some kind of clarity. It's a version of what Sargent does, but it's got a little bit. This case has a little bit more finesse in it. But still, this comes across as a mass drawing, not a line drawing, as you can see. Of course, when you're working from a side light, that's where my point is that that's where the imperative changes. And so I have found that you can work the mentality of the mass from front light, but it's much more difficult to work what you've learned in front light in this way of lost and found. It's easier to do it the other way because you'll be hunting all the time for things you can't even see to draw, and most of my students have done that. And you don't want to be doing that. You want to be blurring the heck out of your eyes and finding out where you should live first, second, and third based on the strength and what they deliver for you. So one of the big stories in this thing is to try to set up this light in the right place on the page where there's one little dot of light powering out of it, right, so to speak. So that is kind of a thing. You're trying to feature that. And then secondarily, you're trying to spot the darks. And the balance of those things are going to give you the composition. That's going to give you the right distribution, the right equilibrium, the right balance. Now, this will give you another idea, but the one down below I've showed you before, it's a memory drawing that I did, and it was all based on blob. I just learned it, and I memorized lines, things that read and what they did, every place they happened. All these things were memorized by me, but I then used a charcoal like a brush. And this is only about that big. It's about postage stamp size. I've showed it to you before. But this is what I would call pure mass drawing. With mass drawing doesn't imply a loss of articulation. It implies a disinclination to draw things you don't need to draw. And I say that meaning you can always push a drawing to more and more detail in less and less contrasty areas. You can always do that, right, in our way of working. But this, what you could say, is the setup. So now getting back to what was happening with the Joseph de Campbell, where I'm beginning to try to show you method a little bit. I've got to make sure that that's, that I'm clarifying what we do. This drawing was set up with line. I would like to say more or less all around, but I don't take trouble to try to draw the bumps on the face. I'm trying to get around here first and get the gesture and proportions of this model. And so I'm using line because it's white paper, and you put this mass of dark in the wrong place over here, and you won't be able to push this back out again. Not very effectively. You wind up with a stain that may damage your light effect. So if if that's where the strength of your light effect is, and you're using the paper for that effect, ideally, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure your paper remains pristine in those places where you have the power lights. So you're working from that preset lightest light being the paper. Now, when you have glossy highlights, and that's where they would tell you don't work from your glossy highlights, but you can do that. Then the figure would become darker, but you can't. You have to be able to then darken the darks dark enough for these darkened lights to look like they're also glowing, because we are looking for that quality, that projection of light. So getting it to just be transposed without having the glory of the light sensation coming across wouldn't be an evidence of mastery of the game. But then what we do is we're up here, and I am always setting up top and bottom from the beginning because I want to work, as we talked about RM, we want to work the proportions based on something. So we're not working from in here, we're working from out here and down here. And then one of the strongest, obviously an early effect in this thing, well, a striking one is this one because it's so clean to look at. But because it's sort of sweeping this way, it doesn't give as clear a location this way. But you can see that there's like the quarters. This is like halves. Parts of this may be in another quarter, or whatever these are. But it's somewhat easy to say there's this, there's this, there's this, and there's this as significant subdivisions. And I don't try to memorize those or put them out with a ruler marker at the beginning. I just simply create them and move them into the right place. I estimate with a little jag or whatever, a little chunk of the charcoal, where the shadow line is. I look at it for 2 seconds, then I mass it and look at it again before I fully do anything tying it on to something else. But this is the line into mass approach. But I'm trying to get to mass as quick as I can. I would like to cover the canvas in the first day with this kind of a drawing, but it's not essential. These drawings usually we do it depends on what your motive is too. But these drawings, which are 25-inch drawings, probably 24-inch figure, are done, they're about 30-hour drawings because they're studies. They're really giving you a chance to study up, to study drawing, to study the figure, to figure out what sorts of goofy things you do. I mean, so it's just an educational process. But it's also from the point of view of the light effect world and that sort of thing, it's an exploration of that. And it's based on what's happening in an impressionist way with light and form, not the Michelangelo way with forms, subforms in a great outline. Nothing I'm saying is in any way taking away from those things. Everything in drawing has its purpose and timing. And when you're making up a figure out of your head, it doesn't do you anywhere near as much good to have a shadow line as it does to know where parts of the anatomy are. I'm just saying, I don't pretend I can make up light when I don't exactly know what the anatomy is doing. Can't do it. Can't make the shadow line make any sense, except in the crudest possible way. So then you can see that this is a development in paint of the same thing, where it's not a contour. This isn't a contour painting. It's a silhouette-based painting. In these early, there is a video of where I show all the steps in this thing. And you can see that I'm doing just this. I'm actually setting up silhouettes to establish top and bottom. And then I'm continuing to use silhouettes. And you can see that I'm developing this one longer right through here because it's the longest continuous strong effect. So there's a leadership of this effect, which is, I'm going to call the mass. So where the mass of dark hits the mass of light, the drawing has to happen there. And I don't put down big stupid blobs. I don't think most mass draftsmen do. Even down here, I didn't do that. I drew what I thought I saw and then adjusted it with an eraser, etc. So, yeah, so this is the kind of stuff we draw rather than, or the cast shadow here, or even this thing, and sometimes, or this, sometimes way before the contour is fully resolved. But you can look at this study and see if you see how that works. You can see down here the visual order where we're talking about not drawing the outline of objects, the contour of an object, but we're working with those things that read. So there's limited numbers of things we work with. Over here it's something here, but nothing important here. It's just a color, but it changes the same value as the wall, as the floor. But you can see that the work is being done to articulate the look of this one compared to this one in the same way as I would make the relative sharpness of this less sharp here, or different in different places, this thing, say, from this. Yeah. Yeah, I have no true idea. If you were sitting here, this would be great. Like, we could have this conversation in a very nice way. But I'm going to go look at your point again. I'm going to look at your question again, see what I left out. I always leave something out, it seems like. Can the contour be rid of? That's a nice question, because the fact is, in theory, we're not working with contours if we're working with patterns of darks and patterns of light. We don't care if it's and that's one of those wonderful things about the naive eye. It doesn't know what a contour is. It just sees the shape where the dark hits the light and the edge, as Gammell was pointing out. That's all it sees. And it sees the color differences at that location and the color relations before that in this purely abstract naive eye world of color value and what happens where they meet. So if you keep remembering, that's what I'm selling here in this way of working. But can it be rid of? In that one sense, yes. It could all be silhouettes. It could all be just pure, contrast, and it has shape. Why do we need contour? Why do we need to know? And I'm with Monet that the less you know, the better. However, there's always the codicil. But you really have to know that then when you look at it, if the content, meaning the fact that it feels like a muscled arm on that silhouette, and that silhouette does that, and yours doesn't do that, then you have a problem in the quality of the work you just did. And this is where I think Gammell would be right, saying that people struggled to become good. They couldn't get all the great qualities of drawing because they didn't have any. They didn't have any skills. And they hadn't long developed skills in the area. So, in the area of drawing, I mean. So what's the right balance to be struck between sculptural mass drawing and an Ang-like focus on line? If you're being visual, if you're being an impressionist, it's just everything's values. And so the sooner you get to them, the sooner you're talking about what's really happening out there. But there's no reason why you can't use line as part of the process of setting up what's happening out there, especially if you're working on white paper. I don't even try to take it away from you on a painting, but you see what I do in my GBA time-lapse video, that I just simply put blobs out there and then find the drawing that is problematical if you don't have some confidence in your ability to draw. It's one of the things that DeCamp noted, that after 3 years of drawing the figure and all the rest, he had confidence in his drawing, and that means that he understood drawing and knew that he could bring it every time. So that's one of those, that confidence is probably a big factor, as Gammell suggests, in thinking you can work from the spots, as we talk about. So I've given you some idea what order they should be approached with, and that is, if you're going to do it, it's either when you're doing a mass, you don't go off and not articulate the shape, or if you're doing a line, you do it for the purpose of setting up a mass. So, and I do it both ways. When I'm painting, it's much more about, there's a light blob sitting there. If I'm looking at that nude, I've made the color of the skin, and I make a dark blob of paint, and with one edge of the brush, I articulate that part that silhouettes, that sets up, say, the neck and shoulder to make the top, and then some part of the foot to make the bottom. That's a real silhouette making, contour making thing, but mostly silhouette. And so with paint, it's more obvious what we're doing. Although I've showed it to you. And so let me know if this doesn't quite get us there, would you, Ilya? Yeah, and the rest of it, I really think is what I've been doing. So do go back and practice. Look at what I did with drawing this guy here. You'll see me doing it. You'll see me throwing lines and turning them into mass fairly quickly. Maybe move the line over once or twice, and then bringing it into the effect world without going all the way to the darkest dark, especially if you're drawing on light paper that you can't recover from. On brown paper, as I said, when you're using white chalk, and the cheap white chalk they sell at Walmart or someplace like that, the junk, not good pastels, it really works better. And if you're using that, and it works better because it doesn't fill up and get thick on you, and you can't get over it. But even that kind of stuff, you can knock it off and then draw the darks right over it pretty well. And it covers the darks pretty adequately too if you brush it off with the brush when you want to move it. But you can set up this whole thing as a painting problem. And some of you I know have tried it. And I recommend that, but it's huge when you're figuring this out, to know what you're doing. If you're working from a middle tone, it's a different world. And I've showed you some paintings I've done and drawings I've done from middle tones. But I shouldn't say that. I've just showed you drawings I've done from middle tones, I think. From on middle tone paper. But you want to be able to do it any which way, but I use line and turn it into a mass so that it becomes a one-to-one with what I'm looking at as soon as possible, and that's the strategy. All right. I better just assume I've done it, and if I haven't, you come back with a more specific question, or even something you've drawn or something, or I might maybe use that as something as a takeoff point. All right, so we are. Oh my goodness, I did not mean to make this go on forever. All right, Ilya, you got your money's worth. Okay. Thank you all again for your contributions today. Really nice. Thank you all for sharing, subscribing, liking, and all the rest that keeps this happening for us. And I'm enjoying doing it. I'm hoping it's benefiting you. And again, one of these days, Mr. Producer, who's busy with a lot of things these days, hopefully we'll be able to get our act together for a live stream. All right. Till then, I hope you have a terrific week. Thank you very much.